Thank you, Meenakshi. Can everybody hear me at the back? Is it clear? Audible? All right. So after a series of extremely interesting sessions in the morning, we're now going to switch gears. We're going to talk about something that's extremely close and personal to each and everybody here in this room, right? Healthcare. How many of you have had some issue with your friends, neighbors, your own family members, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers in your lifetime? Everybody, right? But at the same time, how many of you actually give the importance that your healthcare needs every day? Very few, right? So that's the story of healthcare. That's the problem we face as a country. So let me just walk you through some of these questions that I need you to answer first before I go through the slides. India's population is roughly 1.1 billion people. Do you know how many cardiac patients we produce every year? Roughly 100 million new cardiac patients every year. You know what that means? In this room, 1 out of every 3 people is going to have some form of a cardiac problem. But I don't want to start my speech by giving you morose news, right? But there is always a silver lining for every cloud that you see. Now let's go through some of the challenges we've got to face in healthcare. Now, any normal healthcare system looks like the pyramid that you see, the normal pyramid. So you've got a huge bottom, which is your primary care infrastructure. So to you and me, it would be your neighborhood clinician, a general practitioner that you would just walk into and say, hey, I've got this common cold, I've got a flu, I've got fever symptoms, can you give me a drug that I can take? So that's the essential primary care infrastructure that we're talking about. If the person can't handle that disease, or maybe 2 to 3 days after treatment, if your symptoms still persist, you get escalated to the next level of care. And that's called the secondary care. Secondary care, again, as an example, would fundamentally be a small nursing home or a clinic, or maybe an outpatient department in a large hospital. Most of us are used to walking into large hospitals, Manipal, Apollo, Fortis, you name it. Any of these hospitals, you go to an OP, you get a consultation, you get further diagnosis, further treatment. If that doesn't work, you get promoted to the highest level of care, which is called tertiary care. Mostly inpatient in nature, which means you get admitted. You get admitted, you get treated, hopefully you'll come out in much better shape. Okay? So that's how a normal healthcare scenario works. Now here's what the healthcare scenario looks like in emerging markets. So you've got a primary care layer that's almost non-existent. I'll ask you a question now. How many of you, when you develop a cold or a fever, self-medicate? Me too. I have an extremely good friend who's my neighborhood pharmacist. I walk across, I'll say, Raju Anna, ye dono paracetamol de dijiye, done, over. I try that for 3 days. If it doesn't work, by the way, it doesn't help that my mom's a doc herself. So I've got that added complexity in my mind that I know everything. I go to this pharmacist, gives me drugs, take it for 3 days, problem doesn't resolve, in fact gets worse, then I promote myself into the secondary care. So I go to an OP, I wait for 2 hours, I don't get an appointment, the doc spends maybe 3 minutes with me, says, oh, it's a normal fever, son, let's go get a blood test done. So you go get a blood test done. Blood test comes back, everything seems normal. So okay, go on, some more paracetamol. 5 more days of treatment, nothing resolves, you get automatically promoted into the tertiary care. It's a very, very common syndrome in most of our countries. India is just a proxy. India is one example. There are roughly 202 labeled countries in the world, of which roughly 160 fall in the emerging category. So now, here's another statistic for you to carry away. Of the 7 billion people that live in the world, 1.2 billion fall on the left-hand side. So there's 5.8 billion people that are living in this environment on the right-hand side of the screen. Now think about the conundrum here, right? On one side, you've got 5.8 billion people, gross lack of infrastructure, huge occurrences of diseases, and gross lack of clinical resources. How are you going to solve the problem? You can't create more clinical resources overnight. India produces How many cardiac patients every year? 100 million. How many cardiologists do we produce every year? 140. So there's no way I can flick the switch on and say, I'm going to produce, 2 million cardiologists every year, which are going to take care of the 100 million new patients. So what is required is a fundamental shift in the overall health system architecture of these countries. Now, this is just something for you to take away. The reason why the slide is important, why the statistic is important, is because when you're in the healthcare world, nothing is a point solution. Nothing. There is no such thing called a wonder drug. There's no such thing called a wonder technology. There's no such thing called a wonder clinician. It's always an ecosystem that's at play. You've got to set the entire healthcare system right for something to really last as an impactful solution, right? Now, I'm going to walk you through some of GE's learnings in playing in this space, in emerging markets. We've launched about 50 products so far over the last 15 years in a variety of areas. I'm just going to share 3 big learnings over the last 15 years that we've had. First one. So this product that this gentleman is holding in his hand was the first product that GE launched way back in 2008. Okay, this was about roughly 10 years ago. It's called the MAC 400 ECG. So you look at Harvard Business Review, there's an article written by our ex-CEO, Jeff Immelt, and Vijay Govindarajan, who's an eminent professor of innovation at Tufts School of Business, Dartmouth. They published an article in HBR in 2009 called Reverse Innovation. So the title Reverse Innovation fundamentally comes from this product, which was architected in Bangalore for solving a large problem in India, which was the occurrence of cardiac diseases. So the assumption was very simple. So we said India produces 100 million new cardiac patients every year. There are only 140 cardiologists we produce every year. So the only way I can catch the disease early is if I can screen the disease early. And how do I screen the disease early? I don't put cardiologists in charge of screening. I go to the general physicians. Why do I need to go to the general physicians? Because there are 700,000 general physicians in the country versus 7,000 cardiologists in the country. So it's almost like democratizing the screening process for cardiology. So we said, if I have to go to the general physician, I can't sell the same ECG machine that I sell to a cardiologist because it's expensive, it's cumbersome, a lot of learning curve, and difficult to use, difficult to maintain. I got to simplify how an ECG is done. So we shrunk the machine. So when you shrink the machine, you shrink the cost, you make usability very high, reliability goes up because the number of parts come down. So there's a lot of intricate benefits, intrinsic benefits that are associated with shrinking the device. Interestingly, we used to sell our predicate device, the old ECG machine, for about $7,000 to $8,000. So the average cost of an ECG, if you want to see payback on that investment that I've made as a cardiologist, is roughly about 250 rupees is what I will charge the patient. And this was the scenario 15 years ago. With this system, we started selling this product in the market for roughly $500. So you can see the huge gap in pricing coming down from 7,000 to 500 so that an average GP could actually afford this product. Right? Sounds like a winner, right? Ideally, how would you write a business case for a product like this? Excel. Number of GPs, 700,000. Number of patients per GP, X. Number of transactions, X. Here is the value, charges per patient, blah, blah, blah. You do all the intricate math, and you'll say, out of 700,000, even if I got 10% penetration in the market, which should be easy to do, 70,000 GPs? Well, 70,000 GPs, we've never sold to 70,000 people in this country before. I've only sold to maybe 300 cardiologists. Too big an assumption, make it 5%, 35,000 GPs. You still see massive returns. Do you know how many we actually sold of the system in the first year? 400 units. Because we were used to selling 300 ECGs before, 100 incremental units, that's all we could do. Now, here's the question for you. What went wrong? Product was right. The GE quality was not compromised. Clinical efficacy was outstanding. Customers loved it. Pricing was fine. Go-to-market was also okay. We were learning. We were iterating so fast. But we made a very, very simple mistake. So back in the days when we didn't have AI and ML, we used to have something called interpretation algorithm. In those days, that's what it was called. So we had an interpretation algorithm on our predicate ECG machine called 12 standard lead. So when you go get an ECG done, you'll realize there are 12 wires sticking onto your torso. So it's called 12 standard leads. It spits out an ECG. That ECG gets interpreted by a backend software, which fundamentally says, does this individual have cardiac risk or not? Something as simple as that. So we said this is a bottom of the pyramid product. That interpretation algorithm has been developed over 10 years of research with University of Milwaukee, which costs us millions of dollars. There's no way I'm capitalizing that software on this product. So we took out the interpretation algorithm. But we left it in our predicate device that was being sold to cardiologists. Now think about the situation. I go to a cardiologist. The cardiologist doesn't care what the software is telling him. He's going to use his own mind, he's going to read the ECG, and he's going to say, does the patient have a problem or not? But the GP, on the other hand, the last time he would have ever seen an ECG is when he graduated from med school. Now he's looking at the ECG, he sees the curve, and he can't tell the patient, hey, look, I can't read your ECG. So he calls up his friend, who's a cardiologist in the neighboring village or in a town, and he will read out all the V1, V2, E1, E2, and the cardiologist will say, okay, is there a flutter here? Okay, send him to me. Then he will say, okay, you have a problem, please go there. So the adoption of the product remained low just because we took out one of the most important features, which never comes out in any interview, right? Imagine you're doing this customer insights interview. You walk in with 20 questions and you go to the GP. GP, sir, do you know how to read ECGs? Yes. Do you think a doc will ever say they don't know how to read ECGs? So building the right product is actually the easy thing to do, because a bunch of great engineers like we have in this room here can figure it out. But getting product management right, really figuring out what the right product configuration is an art. It never comes out from a questionnaire. It comes out from immersing yourself, empathizing with the problem that patients and doctors are facing for you to figure out what the right solution should be. That's the first lesson that we've had. It repeats in many forms year after year, different people doing the same mistake again and again, but it's here to stay, and unless you get that art right, your product's never going to succeed. Today we sell about 7,000 of these a year, so we've learned from these mistakes, so it's taken an evolution. This one, it's another very interesting example, very close to my heart. The product that you see on the left-hand side is called a baby warmer. The product that you see on the right-hand side is called a phototherapy device. They're solving very, very simple problems. So India produces roughly 30 million babies every year. Okay? We produce in Australia every year. It's like that. But out of those 30 million babies, we also lose 3 million babies every year. So India has a huge infant mortality rate. So I'm not talking about maternal mortality. We also lose a lot of mothers. I'm not talking about maternal mortality here. We lose a lot of babies. We'll just stick to that problem. So there are 3 problems why we lose babies. It's called ABC. So if anybody's ever been in a fire accident, you'll know what the ABC of a fire rescue is. It's the same concept: airway, breathing, circulation. Okay? So the first thing, if the baby is malnourished, and why is it that babies have these 3 problems in India? Because women are malnourished. They don't get the right iron supplements. They don't get the right nutrition, no clean water. So eventually, over 9 months, the problem escalates and the baby is born malnourished. So when the baby is born malnourished, first, nose has to be opened up so that it can suck in the air. So that's airway. Once it can suck in the air, breathing. You got to keep the baby breathing. It sucks in the air, so you artificially resuscitate the baby. Circulation. When the baby starts breathing, heart starts pumping blood circulates through the body, keeps the baby warm, baby survives. Very, very simple. That's how a baby survives. So we are solving warming in the first product. In the second product, it's a slightly different problem. When they are malnourished and when there's no circulation, most of our babies, at least 60% of the babies born in India have a blue tinge on the skin. My own daughter had that. It's jaundice. Okay? It's called bilirubin content. So every time you get jaundice, your nails will turn blue. So that's the chemical that we're trying to break down using that device. So I'll give you two stories. The predicate device for the warmer used to be a product called Giraffe Omnibed. You can Google it up. It's the Ferrari of warming systems. It's the gold standard. If somebody is producing a new warmer, they will always benchmark it versus the GE Giraffe Omnibed. But that costs $30,000 to buy. There's no way you can afford to buy a $30,000 warmer, put it in an intensive care for a baby, and afford to see payback on that system, right? Why? Because the average cost of a C-section, for example, in the US, is $22,000. So you can do a lot with that money. The average cost of a C-section in India, any guesses? $167. Okay? So again, you got to always keep economics in mind. So our assumption when we started down this problem, this was 2009, we said, great, let's take the Giraffe, let's feature it down, let's get it to the lowest cost possible. So from $30,000, we created a product which we started selling for $3,000, just like the previous story. From $7,000 to $500, this one came from $30,000 to $3,000. So we thought this one is going to sell in, thousands, just like the other Excel exercise. Surprisingly, even for this product, we sold 400. I don't know what's with 400 and all our product attempts, but we sold 400 of these. So here was a learning from that example. So in Vellore, there is a primary care center. We actually went and donated this warmer in Vellore to just, study the efficacy of the device. 6 months later, I went to the same primary care center. And when I went there, two things surprised me. I didn't see babies in the warmer. I saw a wet blanket. So I called the administrator. I said, you've got babies lying right next to the wet blanket on a wooden table, but how come you got wet blankets inside the warmer where the baby should be? The answer was very simple. Sir, it's been raining for the last 5 days. We don't really have a laundry system, and I need blankets for the mother. So this warmer is really good, sir. It just, dries it up in 2 hours. How do you deal with feedback like that? I can't build a baby warmer to warm blankets. Right? So, it's just one of those feedbacks, because share the rest. It'll be an never-ending list. So we changed two things. This warmer is the latest evolution. It's like, version 7 of the warmer that we started in 2009. Couple of things we did. I'll give you a simple change that we did. So on the baby's stomach, you'll see a small white dot. It's a thermocouple. Okay? So a thermocouple is placed on the baby's skin to measure skin temperature. Why? Because there's a feedback loop that basically says if the skin temperature goes down, warm the baby more. If the skin temperature goes up, stop the warming. Normally in the warmer, what happens, you have a plastic cable, nylon cable, just like any other electrical device with a thermocouple on it. What do people do after every baby? They'll take a dab of cotton, swab it clean, so that you disinfect that wire for the next baby. But when you dip it in spirit and disinfect it, it's a good move, it's a good protocol, but when you disinfect the wire with IPA or spirit, it fundamentally breaks down nylon. After 3 months, contact goes away. The nurse will religiously put the thermocouple on the baby, but there'll be no feedback. And they will call GE saying, hey, look, your warmer's broken down. Yeah, sure, it's broken down because you disconnected the wire by rubbing spirit on it. But when you go and train them, 2 months later, the person who you've trained literally leaves the primary care center, goes in search of newer pastures. The next person coming in has no idea of what the cleaning protocol is. So in this product, we made a simple change. We converted that wire from nylon to Kevlar. So we actually added cost to that particular feature so that it never breaks down. Kevlar is the same material you use in a bulletproof vest. So you can dab it all you want in spirit, you can dunk it in spirit, nothing will happen. You're now making it foolproof, training proof, sustenance proof. So the reason why that example is important is because many people think affordability is about cost. It's never about cost. It's always about adoption. And you've got to add cost where it matters for you to drive adoption. This one, on the other hand, the phototherapy device, I'm not going to explain the concept of what we're trying to do here, but talking about cost, can you guys tell me what is usually the competition for these kind of devices? It's another low-cost device made by a local manufacturer who does a quick copy of whatever you do, right? Normally, that's how you follow. A big company comes, innovates, puts a product out in the field, a local manufacturer copies it, gives it at half the cost. It becomes a pure cost play. The real competition for these products is this. In a primary care center, people normally warm babies with a 200-watt light bulb, which costs 30 bucks. I've personally been to primary care centers where there's a baby on a wooden table, on a clean sheet of cloth, with a 200-watt light bulb. Whenever there's a power surge, the 200-watt light bulb will burst, and you will have hot shards of glass literally slicing through the baby's skin. I have seen it. That's the competition you got to deal with. The other one is even more interesting. So I told you my daughter was born with bilirubin, high bilirubin content, right? And my mom is a gynecologist. I was in a big hospital in Chennai. You know what she told me, and this was 16 years ago. So she said, you know what, 8 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the evening, please carry your baby outside, stand there for 20 minutes and come back because the UV spectrum will break down bilirubin. It's fantastic. It's true. That part of the day's UV spectrum breaks down bilirubin. But that was the standard of care in a large hospital in Chennai 16 years ago. It still happens today across India. That device breaks down bilirubin in 28 minutes flat inside the confines of your room. But the competition for that is sunlight. It's free. How do I convince? What's the meaning of a value prop here? I can't write a business case for this. It's something for you to keep in mind. I don't want anybody to ever read what's inside the chart. That's the reason why it looks like that. But it's a very simple chart when you go into the details because it explains the entire workflow of what happens when a girl reaches adolescence age, goes through pregnancy, delivers a child, plus 1 year after the child is born. That's the entire life cycle. Okay? So usually let's just start from pregnancy to childbirth and childbirth plus 1 year. Usually a 2-year term that we're talking about. Normal assumptions that companies make saying, okay, I'm going to solve for infant mortality or maternal mortalities. I'm going to make the next cheapest ultrasound system, next cheapest baby warmer, next cheapest phototherapy device. Great technology, affordable pricing, I'm going to make it work. You know what the sum total intervention that GE technology spend across this 2-year term? So we've got ultrasound, fetal care, maternal care, infant care. We've got at least 30 devices that play across the space. All devices put together, do you know how much time we spend across 2 years with the patient, with the mother and the baby? Sum total of 12 hours. So GE as a company thinks we're going to make a big dent in the world of infant mortality and maternal mortality by participating in 12 hours of a 2-year journey. We couldn't be further away from the truth. So this slide basically tells you that in the world of healthcare, it's never a point solution. It's never one organization that can tip the scale either way. Okay? So what we did, we went and created an accelerator called 5.8. 5.8 stands for the 5.8 billion people that don't have access to care. More importantly, what it does is not a typical startup accelerator. It's an accelerator that actually acts as a gateway for multiple players in the ecosystem to come together. NGOs, advocacy bodies, governments, health systems, clinicians, academia, and startups, working together to solve every step of that overall continuum of care. Okay? That's the only way you'll see impact. Unfortunately, the road is long and winding, but the rewards it's exhilarating. You got to stay vested. That's the challenge with healthcare. You just got to stay invested in it for a long time. Last slide, again, food for thought. We keep talking about the ecosystem of healthcare. That's the ecosystem that you got to deal with. So if any of you is interested in healthcare, what that slide shows you is there's multiple opportunities to participate. And it's an interesting sector to be in only because at the end of the day, it's about saving somebody's life. There's nothing more gratifying than giving somebody the gift of better life. Nothing. Nothing comes close. You save the first time you save a person's life, you could be an engineer, you could be a quality person, you could be, a shop floor assistant, you could be anybody. You could be working on cybersecurity for healthcare. A bunch of healthcare devices can actually get hacked. We have a huge cybersecurity protocol on all our devices. So you could be doing a bunch of stuff, knowing very well that every single intervention that you make is ultimately going towards saving one life that device touches. Right? So with this, I think we got 5 minutes for questions. Sure, right at the end. Yeah, the gap between the technical people and the person who's actually experiencing it. The whole ecosystem, absolutely. Yeah, so the question is fairly simple. Most of the learnings seem to be coming from a big gap between the person who's actually devising or designing the technology versus the ecosystem that's actually adopting the technology. I would say at 100,000 feet, that assumption is right. And I don't think there's one fix or a couple of fixes in the process that can drive the change, but certain things that we are doing continuously to make this better is to make sure that every time it all starts with identifying the right problem. So if I go in saying my problem is a low-cost device, the approach is just tended towards looking at how can I take cost out. But if I say the problem is malnutrition for women, for which I have absolutely no play from GE, but it is my problem. That's the problem I want to solve for. The approach to going at that solution is very different. So then you'll start engaging more with the ecosystem to understand, is there a GE technology? I'm just talking from a GE lens now. Is GE going to participate in it? If yes, how? Is it through a third-party partner? Is it through my own organic IP? Whatnot, whatnot. These are all questions that come up starting with the problem. So identifying the right problem is the first step. The second step, we invest a lot of time and effort on product management. For us, product management is nothing but a mirror image of a customer problem. There is no clear definition of what should a good product manager do. But what a good product manager can do is be a good mirror image of a customer, which means explain the problem from multiple perspectives, not just as a user, not just as a buyer, but as being part of the healthcare ecosystem. If you can take care of these two things and do it continuously, you will start seeing some step changes in the way the overall organization reacts. So that would be my 2 cents. There's some questions in the front.
Hi, I'm Neetu. I'm a product manager with Microsoft. So when you talked about the first device, so when we talk in terms of pure software products, it's very easy to follow the lean principles where you do a quick validation with the customers. When it comes to devices like the one you showed, how do you do those? There is a hardware involved, there's a research involved there. How do you do that quick round of validation with the end customers in this context?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, the term minimally viable product doesn't apply in its true sense for healthcare because you can't put something that's MVP in front of a patient. But we have safe environments that you can create where you can bring in clinicians, you can bring in patients, and have them interact with the product under consent. So you give them a paper which explains the risks that they're taking by participating in a particular experiment. Show them what they would gain if they participate in the experiment, and then you do the experiment. But yes, we do a ton of these experiments ahead of time till you get that launch right. But because the ecosystem is so big, invariably you will miss at least 1 or 2 or 3 out of the several hundred variables that you're dealing with, depending on the problem that you're solving for. So again, in my view, it's a continuous improvement mechanism. Every time you do a new mistake, you get better. Make sure you're not repeating the old ones. That's the only way.
And do simulators sort of devices?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Great talk. Thank you.
Do we have
That would
time
be a
for one
last question. One last question, please.
I'm sorry, how do I send? Oh yeah, very simple. The only thing that works is sell it directly to the patient. So when you go and tell them your baby doesn't have to have jaundice for a week, maybe for 30 minutes, then the patient agrees to pay that extra charge that is required to subsidize for the cost of the equipment. So that's how the marketing in a hospital is very different. B2B, most of it is B2B sales for us. We sell to hospitals. Selling this was, we took a very different approach saying, okay, why don't we advertise directly in the L&D wards and see what the response is. And slowly, once the hospital starts seeing interest from the patients to pay, then they'll start buying our product. That was one means. Okay,
Thank you so much.